Dobar dan I dobrodošli na debatu na temu medijske slobode.
Hello and good day to debate media freedoms and economic position of journalists in Kosovo, organized by Media Center in Čagljevica. Our today's panelists are Maja Fičević, member of Executive Board of Association of Journalists of Serbia, Džamil Redža, President of the Association of Journalists in Kosovo, and Ramče Kasi, Director, Omega Radio Prison, Dane Koruga from OSCE in Kosovo. Once again, welcome. Before we start, let me just note that panelists have 5 to 7 minutes for their expose so that we would have enough time for comments and questions of journalists. I would also like to mention that this debate is broadcasted live on the page of Media Center Facebook page, so I call upon you to join us, and if there are questions, I will read them. For the beginning, we will hear Dane Koruga from OSCE. Mr. Koruga, from your point of view, how do you see media freedoms in Kosovo? What in that regard is the major problem, and how do you assess economic position of the media? Thank you, Katarina. I do speak Serbian, but if you don't mind, I feel a bit more pleasant to speak in English.
I want to thank you for the invitation to be here. Our head of mission, Ambassador Davenport, sends his regards and apologies that he could not make it, but I'll be here representing the OSCE mission to Kosovo. Well, let me start with it's really easy to be very subjective when describing the media situation and the media environment in Kosovo. We can all have our own perspectives and our own kind of viewpoints, but I think it's important to look at an outside perspective, some international indexes, which are a barometer, perhaps a more objective barometer of how things stand. And with that, I want to point to the Reporters Without Borders, the World Press Freedom Index, which has, over the last 6 years, had Kosovo steadily gaining ground, and with the onset of the pandemic, losing, I believe, 7 spots, if I'm correct. And in the 2022 index has gained 17 spots in its ranking with other entities that are in the index, which is a little bit misleading because the overall score for Kosovo remains relatively the same. But nonetheless, it's encouraging that Kosovo has managed to stand ground and to stand stable and to not devolve into a media atmosphere that's dominated by bias, by one-sidedness, by a lack of pluralism. I also want to go a little bit deeper into the score, and because it has an aspect of 5 areas. 2 of those areas which I want to focus on, one is legislative and one is economic. On the legislative aspect, its score is an 80 out of 100. And on the economic, its score is a 45, the lowest out of the 5 out of 100. What does that tell us? That tells us that the legislative, the legal framework for Kosovo is quite good. Of course, it could use reforms, updating, but for the most part, the laws that are in place are in line with international standards and good practices and should be adhered to. And that's why anytime I see potential amendments to changes in laws, we're always alarmed because the laws are not the problem. It's the implementation of the laws that is an issue. And then let me go to the economic score, which is 45, which is quite. It's the lowest score, and it's quite difficult to comprehend. We know that the advertising environment and the revenue that media can gain in Kosovo is quite limited. We know a lot of media function in a multitude of ways, functioning as non-profit organizations, receiving funds from elsewhere. perhaps even jeopardizing the point of independent media. But my point is not to focus on independent media. We should focus on professional media. Professional media that should be objective, that should be not biased, and that should be equal to the way it presents viewpoints. And on a good note, we should say that Kosovo enjoys a pluralistic media landscape where a variety of views are portrayed and presented, and a score of people can see themselves in the media that is offered in Kosovo. So those are some good things and some bad things, of course. And of course, the position of journalists remains a concerning one. The low level of salaries, the contracts, the lack of a labor union for journalists. Those are all issues that I wouldn't say need to be addressed, but that are concerning to kind of stabilize the media community and have it function as it should, which means bringing the right information that is of the interest of the people to the public. I also want to note two other aspects. I don't want to take too much time. I'll leave that for the question section. We have seen already 13 incidents of threats and attacks against journalists this year, which is pretty much steady with the onset of the pandemic. We saw 29 such incidents in 2021, which has been a rise since the previous years. And we see also that certain groups, individuals, feel more free to intimidate and attack journalists, not least online, and not least women. And it's easy when you're anonymous and behind a computer to direct these threats and attacks. And that's a concerning sign. It's something that we as a society need to counter and work against. And the other thing I wanted to point out is something that has been gaining ground regionally, but now we also see it in Kosovo. We call them slaps, but that's perhaps internal jargon for us in media. But those are strategic lawsuits against public participation, which is basically bogus claims of libel and defamation, which certain businesses, individuals, or whoever use to stifle independent media and stifle media reporting. And we've seen an increase in Kosovo over the last months and years. And I think from a societal perspective, but also from a legal and judicial perspective, this is something that we need to be aware of and that we need to battle. But let me not take too long. Let me end on a positive note that Kosovo ranks among the better rankings in the region, and still the improvement of the 17 spots, and I refer to international independent reviews and indexes, shows the plurality and the media freedom of Kosovo is still in a strong state, despite the many concerns, including the threats and safety to journalists, including the intimidation that persists that we must address. So, but I just wanted to offer kind of a little bit of a balanced approach that we should be aware of, and holistically and as a whole attack with the association, with media, with Serbian media, with Albanian language media, with other non-majority media. We should see media as one, as the fourth pillar of democracy, as one serving to the people, and we should battle to have it stand ground and be effective. Thank you. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Mr. Koruga. Now we will hear Maja Fičević, member of the Executive Board of Association of Journalists of Serbia. According to the World Index of the Freedom of Press, they say that Kosovo has advanced, and this year it holds 61st position in comparison to the last year's 78th position. What, in your opinion, influenced this improvement, and how do you assess media freedoms in Kosovo and economic position, first of all, of Serbian media? Hello to all of the colleagues. Thank you for invitations. I think these are only numbers, and regardless of this mild advancement when it comes to media freedoms, nothing special has been done. Generally, there is downfall of media freedoms in the world and after the pandemic, so these are only numbers, and they have a less good assessment than previously. This is the report of the Reporters Without Frontiers, and the entire Western Balkans, Montenegro has advanced the most. In order to have media freedoms and to fight for them, first of all, it is important to have independent and stable, strong media. In order to have them, we have to have stable financing and economic sustainability. I don't see any media capable for that in Kosovo, and lots of media are in critical situation when we talk about financing, and if you get financed in some other ways, you have an influence of the politics or institutions that help you with financing. Journalists, as a profession, do not enjoy such a good position. Everybody can criticize a journalist and request to correct the title or anything, so that journalists suffer a pressure. And when it comes to this index of the freedom of media, and very often they are under the pressure of both the editor or somebody else. What I see in these 20 years, not a major progress has not been made based on my experience and experience of my colleagues, and I think that so many things need to be done in order for the media to be the pillar of democracy and, in the right way, to preserve democracy and protect themselves against attacks of politicians and others, because this is the way to protect the rights of citizens of Kosovo and everybody else when it comes to access of independent information. So this information is not encouraging. When it comes to laws, laws are just something put on paper. It is a question how, to what extent they are implemented. Another problem are not just media freedoms. In addition to this economic insustainability, there is also an issue of the interest of young people and young journalists to do this job. I think we are in a crisis when it comes to journalism. Simply, young people do not see themselves in this business. Not only that this is not well paid, which is very important, but because they believe that they would be under pressure and would not be able to do the job the way they would like to. When it comes to economic sustainability, one of the major problems of the media in Kosovo is economic sustainability. Most of them survive through project financing, and then the pandemic endangered. Additionally, the Serbian media in Kosovo, and there was some urgent funding. Lots of media did not receive this support. On the other hand, lots of them have not applied at all. In the media, you have a low number of employees. In order to apply for any grants, first of all, you have to have experience how to write a project. Who can nowadays pay an expert to plan a project, to write a project? And you have journalists who write projects and they make mistakes, and there is the quality decrease in that regard, and the quality of the program, because if you have a small number of editorial staff, if you write projects, somebody has to work out in the field and to make the program. So the situation is quite critical. And we have been repeating that Kosovo does not have the market, no factories, no developed marketing through the media, and people do not want to use services of small media broadcasted in Serbian, and you cannot have your own budget to cover the expenses of your work. TV is very expensive and you need to pay the employees, licenses, the bills. It is really difficult, and this is not just a story. We have been repeating this. Problems are serious and editorial staff is constantly decreasing, and the quality of the program decreases. If you follow portals and media, these are mostly factographic information, and there's a small number of, I would not say sensational news, but something that was really revealed and which is important and of interest for the public and people living in Kosovo. And I think we all together, politicians and journalists and society, need to work more to get back the reputation and to teach young journalists that they have the right to fight for the truth and to appreciate their profession. I think that young people, and not just young journalists who have been for a long time in journalism, have a tendency to try to for politicians to like them. So the situation is not very good, but in the forthcoming period we need to work all together to improve things, to improve the profession. And when it comes to economic sustainability, there will be serious problems on that account, and I think both TV and radio stations will be slowly degrading and closed. Mr. Kasi, you are the director and you are broadcasting in Prizren. You are heading this media for almost 20 years. How have you been living all these 20 years? First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. Let me greet all attendees. And since I'm here for the first time, I would like to say something about myself and the radio. It's been 23 years since we have been operational. Omega 3 is seated in Prizren and works through internet. Almost 20 years. We have 5 employees. What can I tell you? I would not like to repeat what my colleague has already said, but economic situation is really very, very difficult. In particular, when it comes to non-majority media, how and from what sources are we to get financed in order to survive? For the past 5 years, we as a radio cannot pay employees, and we are compelled now to slowly dismiss employees. This affects the program and the quality. This is all related. If you don't have the money, then you don't have the quality of the program. So if you work for so long, you have problems with equipment. You need new equipment. Who will give you the money to buy new equipment? A digital broadcaster costs maybe 7, 8 to 10,000 euros. If you may have the quality, but it's worth nothing if nobody listens to you. Also, if you have a good antenna and broadcaster, we have been talking about problems. We can have a discussion here, but whether something is going to change or not, I don't know. I don't think it will. Based on this experience, 22 years, no minority media can survive without projects or if in line with a political party. Unfortunately, those media then are not independent. They keep monitoring the work of presidents of the parties and politicians, but those who are not in that party, then you don't have good financing. Also, a big problem for us are wild portals. Nobody knows who they are. They write, they broadcast things, and they receive certain donations. We have to know exactly whether those donations are given to right people and whether they are of use to our citizens, because we are there to broadcast programs for the quality of life in Kosovo. What else could I say? Economic problems are the major ones. I do not see sustainability without certain economic projects. How we are going to keep on, I don't know. We have been living on marketing predominantly, but marketing has a poor situation now. The companies do not work, they do not advertise their products because they also sustain a crisis, and this is a sort of a knot, and it is unknown for both us and the companies how we are going to survive. But we still hope that the situation will improve, that donors will understand the seriousness of our situation. And if you don't have diverse media, it's worth nothing. A country has the value of the media if they are diverse. And OSCE must understand and exert pressure, if nothing else, if they can, or to help us in some way. These figures do not have to be so big, but we need to survive. Thank you, Mr. Kasi. Now we will hear Cemal Areja, President of the Association of Journalists of Kosovo. Kosovo, according to the latest report, has advanced for 17 positions. What affected this advancement and what lacks Kosovo for these media freedoms to be on a higher level? And how would you assess the economic position of the media in Kosovo, or that cannot be generalized, perhaps?
Thank you, Katarina. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. In fact, as previously stated, indeed, Kosovo's ranking recently in the Reporters Without Borders recently is disputable, to say the least. For example, the Freedom House report published just a while before this one, it presents a different picture of the reality and what has happened actually in 2021 in Kosovo. As we said, the score is pretty much the same, just the ranking, because of some changes with other countries made Kosovo jump that much. But what has happened in 2021 is that there was a continued effort of politics to interfere with the work of the media through various forms of pressure, and of course mainly through public statements that they have made, through intimidations, threats, or attempts to obstruct their work with a public pressure by people close to those in power. So journalists are continuously subjected to the harassment online mainly, thankfully not necessarily in person, but in 2021 there was also a serious attack against the journalist who suffered serious injuries. So it's not that it's only confined online, and it's not really as good as the report of Reporters Without Borders indicates. Of course, every government, in one way or another, does make an impact to influence the media through its own narratives. But in 2021 and 2022, there was an increased attempt of the government, of those in power, to impact the work of the media, which we have denounced continuously. In order to have true freedom of media and independent media, professional media, there has to be an economic sustainability, an economic independence. As the Association of Kosovo Journalists, in principle, we defend the work of journalists as individuals, but also the position of the journalist in the editorial desk, in the medium, has to be economically stable. So the media have to be able to be financially stable and to provide appropriate working conditions for their staff. And so in the absence of a union of journalists, we also try to exercise that role, even though we don't have a direct communication with the government in this regard, but we try to convey the concerns of journalists and the media to them. We have discussed it with everybody that the decreased interest of ads of companies to pay for marketing, and the local media are in the worst position, and even worse, the non-majority media, non-majority community media. Of course, the pandemic situation has had a major impact, and we have all seen this. Of course, not just in Kosovo, but elsewhere as well. In Kosovo, it has led to a complete disappearance of printed media. But in fact, what happened is that we had two TVs that were opened in times of pandemic. Now, indeed, Kosovo does have a pluralistic media landscape, which is better than in the region, and indeed it presents all the perspectives. But the opening of this media does allow for young people who study journalism find employment. It increases their work opportunities, but it does not guarantee long-term stability for as long as journalists are forced to change jobs quickly. There will be no stability and sustainability. And this is what has happened, at least in the Albanian language media. And we also heard Maya and what she said with regards to the Serbian language media and the gentleman with the Bosnian radio. Our interest is, of course, to ensure that local media survive and are sustainable. In the recent initiative with NDI and the Media Commissioner, we made some efforts, and we're lobbying to the Independent Media Commission to change the law on the IMC, because here is where we need a change so that it helps the local media more. All the media that are registered with the IMC will have to pay for a license. It's in their and everybody's interest to make sure that this is regulated better. There's a regulation of 2000, according to which 5% of the budget from the license has to be allocated, has to be shared to the media that are registered media. This has never happened because it was said that it contradicts the law on public finances. What we are trying to do is to speak with MPs to make sure that if the law on IMC will undergo amendments, to propose a creative solution which is in line with the legislation to help local media. So highlight an emphasis on local media, local radios, local newspapers, portals. Of course, knowing that the non-majority community media are in a worse position. So I invite everybody here to lobby with their MPs and MPs from their communities to push this idea forward and to see if we can change something in this regard, to really see if through the IMC we can help or extend a helping hand to the local media. Of course, the IMC is voted by the assembly, so in principle it is an independent body, but it is elected by the assembly. So through the MPs we can hopefully do something. Now, what else we're doing? We have proposed, and we're in the process of finding another form of assistance, of help to the local media. Of course, again, with the generous assistance of OSCE, we are in the process of providing trainings for local media staff regarding their presence in the social media. Just last week, we have completed the first round of training. It took place in Peja. The next one will be in Ferizaj. There will be others throughout the regions of Kosovo, where experts of the area will provide trainings for the staff of these local radios and portals to how to increase their reach, their presence online. Because at these current times in 2022, a higher presence online could generate revenues. If there's more original content, of course, not to infringe copyright laws, could present an opportunity, as little as it can be, to generate additional revenues, which could help their functioning. We are also in the process this month of completing an internship project for 3 students of journalism of Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian communities in the local media. They have been deployed in private media, majority community media, to build their skills, and hopefully they could be retained by them. Like, for example, one of the interns, she went to Radio Prosperity in Jakova, which is a non-majority community media, and with the help of OSCE again, we managed to help another journalist to find job, but we helped also a local radio to have another journalist available, and not having to pay that person for at least 2 months. So it's in our interest to do whatever we can to ensure that we improve the financial sustainability and economic sustainability of the media. This is something that we have to do it, and hopefully we can do more in this regard to ensure the financial sustainability of the media and of journalists as well individually.
We will now go to questions of journalists, but before we do that, let me ask the panelists if they have questions. Thank you for this realistic view of the media for the future. However, is that so, and will that be so? It is a question mark. You said that all members in the IMC, for all boards, stronger boards, that they are elected by the Assembly. Does the Assembly do this job really fairly and honestly? It is a good question, because I have to say this again. I applied twice to be a member of the board. Imagine, nobody gave me any piece of information why I was not admitted. Nobody told me nothing. This is an institution that needs to enact laws and keep the order in the state, and they act in this way. And imagine they select people, some other people who are not from our branch of business. Then the vacancy should be public, and they need to say that we just need not to apply. Knowledge is not necessary. Nobody asks you whether you know something or not. What can you say within 1 minute? So, in advance, it's agreed who will be on that board. So it is really a shame. I have been working for 22 years, starting from my studies, and I know the problems of the media very well. And it would be much better contribution than if they would have a person who has no knowledge of the media. If you have such experts in all positions, how this state will continue forward with poor staff, with bad staff, because you will not take anybody privately. If you have a private company, a bad person, a bad expert to work in your company. So financing goes through this assembly. I agree with financing, but the quality of the RTK program, this is really below any level in comparison to what they are paid, because they do not have any concern whether they will receive the salary or not. Unlike us, who have to work for 24 hours and we are not certain that we are going to be paid. Can somebody come and say non-majority media, maybe not all of them, but at least some of them should be financed from the budget so that the program would have a better quality? The more media and diverse media we have, this is a plus for the state. Unfortunately, the situation is not like that. When it will be, we still don't know, and we hope it will improve. Any other questions or comments?
Just to add to Mr. Kasi, we've raised the issue of the board of RTK because this was a process monitored by the civil society. There were complaints continuously. What happened this year was the longest recruitment process ever. 100 individuals have applied for members of the RTK board, and the process was delayed. It was monitored closely, and the civil society has considered that the process itself was illegal. But of course, there are individual complaints that were filed, and one was even a complaint was even filed in a court on grounds of violation of gender equality or the gender equality law. Somebody has considered that there's a discrimination and that there's a a violation of the law on RTK regarding gender equality, so they have sent the case to court. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I just want to address two things just very briefly. I mean, subtly touching on what both of you mentioned, and it's right now we have in process the draft laws on the law on RTK and the law on the Independent Media Commission. I see it as very much as a shortcoming that there have been attempts to change from a qualified majority to a simple majority to elect members of the IMC or the board of RTK, which would essentially mean that the opposition is no longer involved in the election of the representatives, and it is only the party that is in power, whichever party is in power. I firmly believe, and we as a mission firmly believe, that it should be an inclusive process that includes the opposition and as much of the representatives of the people to elect the people that are in power. And we'll see how these things develop. This hasn't come to a head at this point, but it's something that we as a mission are monitoring. But we as a mission can only do so much. We're here an international organization, and we're here actually to support the local stakeholders, the association, the local media, civil society, and others who have a vested interest, as do we, but you're the ones who will continue to carry this through. So those are just two points I want to mention, which might be some of the upcoming issues in terms of legislation and media.
Kolege, izvolite, da li neko ima pitanje za...
Colleagues, do you have any questions for our panelists? For Gemail and Mr. Koruga, I assume that you follow mostly attacks against journalists, incidents, etc. What is the trend? What has been the trend in the past years when it comes to attacks against journalists and solving of these cases? And the question for all could be, how do you assess that when it comes to some cases, more than 20 years have passed and abductions and murders of journalists have not been resolved in the period from 98. Do you expect that specialized councils in The Hague will do something on that account?
Of course, we in our association, we monitor all cases that are reported to us and those reported to the police, all types of threats, intimidations. There are some who do not report them to the police at all, but they only come to us directly, or the other way around, they do not come to us, but they go directly to the Kosovo police. But we get statistics even from the police, and we see that indeed there was an increasing trend to 29 from 21, 29 cases of various forms of reported last year of attacks, one with a serious injury in 2021. Most of them are threats online, including very serious threats that call for physical elimination, and all the way to insulting language, offensive language, swearing, cursing, which does have an impact in the work nevertheless. If I can go to the second question right away that you raised. We in our association, we have raised this matter continuously, and we want to shed light to the fate of all journalists that are missing or have been killed. We urge the local judiciary to address these cases regardless of their ethnicity. The specialized chambers have a very time-limited mandate, but there could be cases that could be raised there as well. However, I believe that it is a responsibility of the domestic justice system, of the domestic judiciary, to do more to shed light to the cases of missing and killed journalists in this period.
Thanks, Jamal. Thank you for the question. I think we need to see this in the prism of a changing media landscape. The proliferation of online media has also allowed threats and attacks to go allowed it to be more anonymous and go unpunished, and that's why we're seeing a bit of an increase. And the onset of the pandemic, the economic challenges, I think that's why we're seeing more threats and attacks and intimidation of journalists, which of course is not good. But there's been a backlog of cases, not just only to the case of journalists, but in general. So it's a general problem that the judiciary needs to deal with. On the positive note, there are prosecutor coordinators to deal specifically with cases of attacks and threats against journalists at the central level and at the local levels. So this is also being coordinated, and this is being effective, led by Besim Kelmendi. So I think there's some positive structural steps in this regard, and we do hope also to see some effective results in this. As for the cases of the murdered missing journalists, you know that we as a mission, we have been advocating to raise awareness on this issue, but you know we can only do so much. It's up to the Kosovo judicial system, the legal system to really act and prosecute these cases. As difficult as that may be, knowing the jurisdiction that has taken place over the various years since basically 1998 until 2005, when the majority or when actually all of these cases took place. We count them between 15 and 17. But I think it's been also equally important to raise awareness and to bring justice to the families of the victims, so they have some sort of resolution and in peace in what happened to their loved ones. But of course, we hope that this is taken forward in a judicial perspective. But that is something that we'll have yet to see, and I'm not going to comment on the special chambers and the proceedings going on there. I think we'll see the outcomes in some time. Thank you.
I would like to ask a question, first of all, to Maya. She mentioned a problem of applying for projects and that journalists do not know how to write projects. Have you given thought when you want to do something, a media has to take a risk regardless of the financial situation, that within your media you train a person that would work on the projects. In Kosovo, there is an organization in Pristina that on a monthly basis trains people whether to pay taxes and apply for projects. It is approximately 45 euros, I think, and this could be some sort of a training. It is an investment for the future, and it is not a major sum. So this could help. Have you been thinking in that regard how to train them? For Mr. Reja, a question. Is there any piece of information how many journalists work without contract, which is a big problem? And what Mr. Koruga mentioned, is there any thought of creating a union of journalists, of establishing the union, which overnight, but let's say within a year, would have effect when it comes to low salaries of journalists, where people really have to sustain their families? And it is enough just to have a death case, and half of the budget goes on that, and the union would really be able to help. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Let me say, first of all, that I spoke on behalf of the Association of Journalists, and I tried to encompass all media, but Radio Mitrovica North, this is the media that I work for. This is a good idea, but what we are lacking are people, so you need to have an educated person, not even educated, somebody who understands and wants to do only that. It is very difficult to find such a person. We have a big problem as Radio Mitrovica North to find such people who would get trained. Regardless of the fact that we have so many young people in Mitrovica and university, when you have young people, you can set aside some money and invest. You invest in portal, in equipment. You constantly have investments, and we would invest in it, but there is a problem of time. So if somebody works on that, it is one person, in this case myself. By that, you have to put aside the program, working on the program, so that we do fight. The situation is not so alarming, but it is not terrific. We need to have more people and more money to serve people, and that and they are entitled to receive right and accurate information and the truth.
Thank you for the question, Violeta. It's not that we have clear figures as to how many journalists operate without contract. Also because they move continuously, we have numerous journalists that go from one portal to another every couple of months, 3 months. And in Albanian media, most media just hire journalists on internships first before they sign regular employment contracts, and then they are not necessarily extended. But what I have to mention is that we are cooperating with the Labor Inspectorate of Kosovo, and we encourage journalists to either go directly to the inspectorate or to come to us to report violations, and then we'll raise the matter with the inspectorate on any failure to comply with the terms of the contract. And there were cases where journalists have filed their cases to the inspectorate for failure to enforce the contract or failure to give annual leave, and I know a few cases where people were even reinstated to work. So the labor inspectorate has forced the employer to either apply the leave or reinstate them, give the positions back. So this is something that we're trying to do to help in this regard, to work with the inspectorate. And in this way, we also raise the awareness of the journalists, because they have to also speak up about their injustices that they face. They become more aware, more courageous to fight for their rights. So now we see that they're becoming more aware of this. With regard to the union, I'm not sure if there's any initiative to establish it. Most journalists are members of the Association of Journalists of Kosovo. We have about 800 members across all communities. What I said earlier is that we try to sort of perform some roles of the union that the union would normally do, but of course we're not a typical union. We don't have a dialogue with the government, but if there's an effort to establish a union, they would enjoy my full support.
After the war, when formation of the Association of Journalists of Kosovo started, there was an initiative to establish the union. I took part in that, and practically the donation was provided from Sweden, from Norway, I apologize, and persons who were supposed to work on that statute overnight, unfortunately, withdrew, and we understood even then that we needed really this union. What I understood later why this stopped, and these are our colleagues who work in the media, and they are quite influential, and this is the fact that there was a problem amongst the journalists themselves as to who will be leading the trade union and who will control the budget. So this is what I think. Once you solve this, where this membership fee and the money will be safe, then it will be fine. So we need to work it step by step and solve this issue first, and after that it will be easy.
So we would not see the work of a union as a competition of ours. Absolutely on the contrary. I know that in all the countries in the region, and in Croatia including, there are strong unions of journalists that closely cooperate with the Association of Journalists, so they only complement each other's work.
Do we have any other questions for the panelists? Does the economic position of journalists, a question for all panelists, does it influence on the freedom of media and editorial policy? Does anybody who finances, a sponsor, a donor, influences editorial policy and suggests in what direction the media should develop? I spoke about it in the introduction. If you don't have independent and stable finance based on marketing or anybody else, this is the only way to be free and democratic. Everything else, regardless of to what extent we say that it doesn't affect editorial policy, yes, it does. So only economically independent media can really be independent media. Solution is to be economically independent, to have access to the funds that will support independent media, to have a developed market. This is a big problem of Serbian media in Kosovo. You don't have factories, you don't have strong companies who want to invest in advertising. Additional problem is the development of technology. Everybody uses social networks. So whoever has a small business and needs advertising and who used these resources of the media previously in that regard, nowadays they advertise on social networks, and this is free of charge for them, although social networks are not free of charge in essence. And for them this is much easier, and this is really a problem. We as the radio in Mitrovica, we almost do not have commercials. There are some projects, networking, it is a constant struggle. There has to be a way found, and what colleague Reja mentioned, maybe to apply for the funds of the IMC. We expect this adoption in the Assembly so that we have a constant fight, and we'll see how it works. Marketing funds cannot sustain the number of the media existing in Kosovo. Here we still have the international community and donors who support this. On the other hand, number of the media existing in Kosovo is very good because it contributes to this multiplicity of views and perspectives, various perspectives, so that we have informing in various ways. What the solution is, I don't know, but it would be good for it to comprise this diversity of the media, but through marketing approach, this is not sustainable. in the long run. That's clear.
Tani natyrisht që ka ndikim, pra jo domosdoshmërisht mund të jetë pra ndikimi
Of
politik.
course, there's an impact. It doesn't have to be a political influence. There could be individual influences too, for as long as a medium has ads of a certain corporation of a strong individual who are run by individuals who have ties with politics. There could be an influence that goes through that, because there could be a strong connection with an MP of Kosovo, and of course, this influences the independence of the media and the quality of their work. In the worst case, a small private media will promote the work and the activity of an individual MP in return to return the favor. And this happens a lot. It happens a lot with portals. It happens a lot in election periods. And this all influences the quality of reporting. If we look at the local elections, especially with regards to the Albanian community, there were heavy promotions of candidates who had zero chance of getting elected. And the media, because these were sponsored campaigns, followed no standard, no quality of reporting whatsoever, only to promote those candidates.
Mr. Koruga said it a while ago that there is donor community in Kosovo, but what is the trend when we talk about the support for financing projects? We hear that many media survive by project financing, and what would happen if this support, first of all, international donors would stop? A question is for everybody. Just one short sentence. If we wouldn't have this support, many media would be closed. Let me just say about something that happened in Belgrade. They also had strong donor support to the media and NGOs, and the economic crisis in 2009 made it all stop overnight. And the support, both the support for NGOs and to the media, I don't say this is going to happen in Kosovo, but we can never know if there is going to be an extraordinary case which will make everything stop. So far, there is OSCE and EU office and the Council of Europe and various donors, United Nations and various organizations from Germany and many others, but there may be a situation where overnight everything ceases. This is what happened in Belgrade in 2009 and 10. And I think the media who rely on this support, in particular media of minority communities, need to think and already start preparing how to sustain, how to survive financially. This is a key issue. We as OSCE support this and we work on it.
I think that the help will continue, but we cannot count on it to be long-lasting or to be here forever. As was said earlier, we have to make efforts to build the capacities of these media so that they become self-sustainable. We have to invest in people, in other forms, so that they can become, as much as possible, self-sustainable. And what we need also is a sort of a coalition of smaller media, a network, if you will, of media, so that they can apply jointly for these projects. I think this could be one form where they could support each other.
Let me first ask Mr. Koruga to ask him in what way they help the media, because We have been existing for 22 years. We have not received anything from OSCE. We have had attempts but have not managed to get anything. When it comes to these projects, it is very important to say that every project that has been completed by any organization, just open it and you will see the names repeated and the donors. So practically, are you dependent or independent media? And every project that is received, they will never allow you to write whatever you want and think, but what somebody directs you to write. Not everything, but there is influence on any piece of news that is given to the public.
I'll switch to English where I'm more comfortable. um, I don't believe in that. We do not engage in direct financial support to any media. Albanian language media, Serbian language media, or any other non-majority media, because that is not sustainable. You could have our financial support today and tomorrow and the following day, and then it will cease. That's not the way to establish media. We have, I would say, modest initiatives now, where we're trying to build the presence and the advertising engagement of media. Because I'm not sure about your media, but you will be always welcome to join. We're never closed-minded, and we're never closed to helping anybody. But to think differently and to diversify their financial sources. Maya can speak to this as well, because she can tell you how Radio Kosovo Mitrovica is financed. It's partially financed by advertising. It's partially financed by donor foundations that come from embassies, international organizations, etc., and in other outlets. What we want to do is make a more sustainable model and a more diversified model of advertising. So whatever comes in the future, you can kind of withhold and withstand. Ideally, that would be through marketing and advertising, but unfortunately, the limited economic prospects in Kosovo are difficult to overcome, and I think we'll just see what the situation will be once we come to that point.
Office for communities within the Prime Minister's office in previous years, since 2012, has been advertising invitations for minority media. I think the fund was 200,000 euros a year, but in the past years it has not been done. There are no such invitations for the past 3 to 4 years. Do you know anything about it? And why, in your opinion, is that so? And where are these funds directed, which are set aside for minority media? Who is the question for?
I cannot speak on behalf of the government of Kosovo. I know that there was a fund that should have went to non-majority communities. If that is not happening, we have to hold them accountable. I think that you have to hold them accountable, the government of Kosovo, what happened to those funds. I mentioned it earlier, that there's an impact by the government, because when they finance them through that way, it could have an impact. And that happens especially in the local media of Albanian language, which are funded by municipalities in which they operate, which means that automatically they will support in one way or another the party in the governing party in the municipal level. But either way, I think that when it comes to the non-majority media, the situation is a bit different. We know that they are under-financed. I think that, yes, this fund could be a good form to help the non-majority media.
I'm not a representative of the government of Kosovo, so I will not comment on the on where this goes and what is this stance. But I think it's important if this is earmarked not only for non-majority media but also for local media, which also have difficulties in financial viability. That be sought through in an objective, transparent, and fair manner. And as a mission, as the OC mission, this is something that we're monitoring and we're engaging with the government to see through in a transparent and an effective way. As we're also looking for public institutions and government representatives to respect the law on the use of languages. As we know, the languages of Kosovo are Albanian and Serbian, and that is also something that we are making a priority, just so we can have information coming to all communities in Kosovo, and of course the biggest non-majority community being the Serbian language community, but also others, the Bosniaks, the Romaškali Egyptian, the Kosovo Croat, and others. Thanks.
I apologize. Let me just add, of course, I know that you don't represent the government of Kosovo and that you cannot speak on their behalf, but I raised this issue because associations of journalists of Serbia and OSCE has been familiar with that, and I think that OSCE promised to check with the Office for Communities why this tender has not been advertised, and these two associations requested in previous years an answer from the government of Kosovo what happens with that fund and why things over there are not transparent. And I think that we have never received a response. This is why I asked whether you know that something in the meantime has changed, whether you learned something, and maybe this is an opportunity once again for you to appeal on the government to clear things out and tell us what's going on. These are not small funds, 200,000 euros, not for minority media, local media employing 5 to 6 people. These are major funds and they would mean a lot for them to survive within a certain period. Thank you. Maybe the real address, the Association of Journalists of Kosovo and this other association, they should be persistent in asking why nobody from the government during pandemic has not helped a single media. As if the media do not exist. Now somebody should come and ask, there is somebody in charge of the media, I guess, and should come and ask, what have you been doing for these 2 or 3 years? Have you managed to survive? Nobody has even asked this question, not to mention giving any funds. We have to write a request or to get united to see what's going on, whether they have an intention to help us. We do have projects like all the countries in the region who provide help. Nothing helps here. Maybe they don't have people in charge of working with the media or they forgot about us.
I promise I will raise this matter on behalf of the association, of course, not personally, to the government. I think that in the beginning of the pandemic, the media were paid through the payment of the wages of the staff in the amount of 170 euros a month in the first months, April, May 2020. I think that it required an application, but I know that that this was made possible. I'm not sure if your media has benefited or the non-majority community media have benefited from this, but I know that the majority community media did benefit from this fund and from this facility.
what Reja talked about, we have not used these funds and we were not informed. We do not expect from the government to support small media. They simply don't have an interest. They are led by their interests when it comes to the budget. That is to say, the fund. We need to see whether every year the budget is adopted for the next year and to see whether in the previous 3 to 4 years the budget was adopted. If yes, then it had to be implemented. If so, then we need to see where this money was spent. But we need to check first whether this was included in the budget. Thank you for the proposition and initiative. We are only at the beginning of our mandate. We do not have the president at the moment, but I hope that soon we will solve all that and be able to implement all these initiatives and have results.
Neko pitanje za paneliste?
Other questions for the panelists? No.
Nema ni na Facebooku.
No questions on Facebook either, so that I would like to thank today's panelists. I thank you, my colleagues, and all those who followed us live on Facebook page. Today's debate is over. I wish you a good day. Thank you, Katarina, and let me thank you for having both associations here and working for the interests of journalists and working for the media from minority communities. Thank you for this debate.